If you think civilization began with kings, you're already looking too late. It didn't begin with crowns. It didn't begin with philosophy. It began with counting. Before empires, before monuments, before history had a name, humanity's first real breakthrough was accounting. Welcome to AB DeepFrames. Tonight, we're going back 5,000 years, not to admire the first civilization, but to understand what it really built. Long before Rome, long before Egypt, there was a land trapped between two unpredictable rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This land would later be called Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. But if this was the cradle, what exactly was being born? The rivers were violent. They flooded without warning. Entire harvests could disappear in a single night. One season of chaos could mean starvation. Most communities would have left. They didn't. They studied the floods. They carved irrigation canals into the earth. They redirected water. They engineered control. And that was the turning point. Because once you control water, you control food. And once you control food, you control survival. And once you control survival, you shape society. Small villages began clustering together. Cooperation became coordination. Coordination became structure. Structure became cities. Uruk, Ur, Babylon. These were not random settlements. They were designed. Every city had walls. Every wall had gates. Every gate had guards. Security wasn't an afterthought. It was architecture. And at the center of almost every major city stood a towering structure, a ziggurat, a massive stepped temple rising into the sky. We're told it was built for the gods. But temples were more than spiritual spaces. They were administrative centers. Grain was stored there. Labor was assigned there. Trade was recorded there. Religion wasn't separate from power. It was power. The priesthood didn't just interpret divine will. They managed resources. If you controlled the message from the gods, you controlled distribution. And distribution is influence. Then, around 3200 BC, something happened that changed humanity forever. Symbols began appearing on clay tablets. Cuneiform, the first writing system. We celebrate writing as creativity, but the earliest tablets weren't poetry. They were lists, barley deliveries, livestock counts, worker assignments, debt records. The first written words in human history were about tracking goods, tracking labor, tracking responsibility. Writing transformed memory from something fragile into something permanent. And permanence changes power. When rules are spoken, they can be denied. When they are carved into clay, they endure. Writing allowed systems to outlive individuals. It allowed authority to survive its creators. That's when civilization stopped being temporary. Then came kings, and one ruler would leave a mark that still echoes. Hammurabi. Under his rule, Babylon rose to dominance. But his greatest weapon wasn't an army. It was law. The Code of Hammurabi. Nearly 300 laws, carved into stone, displayed publicly. If a man does this, this shall happen. It sounds like justice, but it also does something else. It makes authority visible, permanent. Imagine walking past a stone pillar listing punishments every day. You wouldn't need constant surveillance. The law would already live in your mind. Order replaces chaos. But sometimes order is simply chaos. Under supervision, daily life in Mesopotamia was structured. Mud brick homes lined narrow streets. Markets buzzed with trade. Merchants traveled across vast distances. But what made this civilization different was documentation. Marriage contracts were recorded. Property ownership was registered. Wages were documented. Business agreements were sealed in clay. Scribes became essential. Literacy was rare, exclusive. Only trained scribes could read and write, which means most people lived inside a system they could not interpret. The rules existed, but access to understanding was controlled. And that imbalance quietly shaped power, because power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it writes. And yet, despite all this organization, something haunted Mesopotamia: flood stories. One of the oldest surviving works of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. It tells of a great flood sent to destroy humanity. Why would one of their earliest epics focus on annihilation? Because the rivers that gave them life could erase them overnight. Every wall, every tablet, every city, gone. Maybe writing wasn't just about control. Maybe it was about fear. Fear that tomorrow, everything could disappear. So they recorded, they documented, they carved memory into clay, as if permanence could protect them from nature. Recording is a form of resistance, but systems have limits. Over centuries, irrigation caused salt to build up in the soil. Crops weakened, harvests declined, internal conflicts grew, external invasions increased. The civilization that engineered stability could not engineer permanence. It didn't collapse in a single dramatic event. It faded, absorbed by empires that followed. But something survived. The blueprint, urban planning, written contracts, tax systems, codified law, bureaucracy, the idea that society should be structured, the idea that authority should be recorded, the idea that life should be documented. All of it began there, between two unstable rivers. We call Mesopotamia the cradle of civilization, but maybe that phrase is incomplete. It wasn't only the cradle of progress, it was the cradle of systems. And systems don't just manage life, they shape it. From the first barley ledger to modern databases, from clay tablets to digital records, the logic is the same. Structure creates order, order creates authority. Authority sustains civilization, but it also defines its limits. So the next time you sign a contract, pay a tax, or enter your name into a system, remember where that instinct began. Not with kings, not with monuments, but with counting. Maybe civilization wasn't born when we built cities. Maybe it was born the moment we decided to record. If this changed the way you see history, subscribe to AB DeepFrames, because sometimes the past isn't buried, it's operational. And in the next episode, we examine the first empire that took this system and turned it into domination. See you in the next frame.